Alhamdulillah wa kafa wassalatu wassalamu ala ibadihi alladhina istafa khususan ala afdalihim wa khatamin nabiyyin Muhammadin al-Amin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa ba'd. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, including the last of them all, the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, as we greet you from the city of Derby in Britain with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our topic today is not an easy one to digest, so it would have been preferable to have our main meal before this lecture, because after the lecture it might be difficult to digest the food. The Quran, the Great War, and the West. And we use a methodology of locating data in several different places in the Quran and in the Hadith, but we have to find that which connects them together to be able to penetrate the subject. That's not always an easy thing to do. We begin with a very famous event in which our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, was speaking to a companion whose name was Mu'az ibn Jabal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and he gave him a timeline of events with which history will culminate. He said, when Jerusalem, I'm giving you the English translation, not the Arabic text, when Jerusalem is center stage in the world, look at Medina, it is in forlorn desolation, playing no role at all in affairs of the world. No role at all in affairs of the world. Forlorn desolation. At that time, he said, the next event which will occur would be the Malhama, the Great War. And the Christians refer to it as Armageddon, and the Jews do the same thing. He then said, after the Great War, the next event that will occur would be the conquest of Constantinople. And because of this, they changed the name of the city from Constantinople, and they prevented, you are legally prohibited from using the name Constantinople now in Turkey, in order to hide this subject. That the conquest of Constantinople, prophesied by Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, would take place 7 years after the Great War. But another hadith says 7 months. And then after the Great War, the next event to occur would be the khuruj of the Antichrist, of Al-Masih al-Dajjal. Khuruj means appearing in person. Prior to this, he was here, but the Quran refers to him as a shadow, and the shadow will appear in 3 parts. And my book, Jerusalem in the Quran, if you look at the cover design, you'd see the 3 parts. That in the first part, the Antichrist, having brought modern Western civilization into being, they don't teach this in political science. in the universities. Having brought modern Western civilization into being, the Antichrist then gave us the first stage in which Pax Britannica occurred. And Britain became the ruling state in the world. And then in the second stage he gave us Pax Americana. And the United States replaced Britain as the next ruling state in the world. And at all instances, Britain, United States always have an obsession with the Holy Land, an obsession with bringing the Jews back to the Holy Land, an obsession in restoring a state of Israel in the Holy Land, an obsession in getting that Israel to rule the world. And so after Pax Americana comes the third and the last stage of the shadow, Pax Judaica. And then the Antichrist, or Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, would appear in person. The Christian world doesn't know this. We have this in our eschatology. They don't have it. And guess how many scholars of Islam are teaching this subject? When he appears in person, at that time you will see him, he will be a Jew. He'd be a young man. He'd be powerfully built. He'd have the curves at the side, the sideburns that the Torah says that the Israelite people must keep. So here is the opening statement of our lecture, the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which gives us this extraordinarily important timeline of events. And in this timeline of events is located the Great War. And that's where we are now. Because Jerusalem is now center stage. An Israeli prime minister said many years ago, we control the United States of America. That's what he said. If any Pakistani prime minister were to say that, the bombs would start falling. But Israel could say that and get away. We are precisely at that moment now in history when Jerusalem is center stage, and Medina is playing no role whatsoever. It's in forlorn desolation. And so we are, in fact, now waiting for the next event, which is the Great War. As a consequence, Islamic scholarship should have this on the front burner. The scholars of Islam should be lecturing on this subject. The mimbar should always be speaking on this subject. Is it not mysterious that nobody speaks on it? Nobody speaks of it. The Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, not only informed us that there's going to be this great war called the Malhama, but in another hadith which I'll quote later, which perhaps I quoted yesterday, I don't know, he said that 99% of those who fight for what he called a mountain of gold would die in this war. So this cannot be conventional warfare. This has to be warfare using weapons of mass destruction. And the most famous of them all is nuclear weapons. But the enemy probably has other weapons that we don't know about. And only when the war starts will the world witness these weapons. The Quran confirms what our Prophet has said. And now we turn to the second part of the lecture. And this is a verse of the Quran located in Suratul Isra. And this is what Allah says. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإن من قرية إلا نحن مهلكوها قبل يوم القيامة. There is not a single city that will escape, but that we will destroy them all. And we will do this before the end of the world. This is not the end of the world, this is before the end of the world. أو معذبوها عذابا شديد. And those cities which escape total destruction will experience terrible punishment. كان ذلك في الكتاب مسطورا. And this is something inscribed in the book, that this has come to pass. Every city will be destroyed, and those who do not experience destruction will experience terrible punishment. When the Quran says every city will be destroyed, before we come to a conclusion, we need to go to the rest of the book, the Quran, to analyze and to explain this statement. And in the rest of the Quran, Allah has promised that He will protect those who have faith. حَقٌّ عَلَيْنَا نَصْرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He will protect those who have faith and who are righteous in conduct. And in Suratul Kahf, which is the surah of the end time, you recall someone named Zulqarnain, and he has power. He can choose to do anything he wants to do, but he says, I will use my power to protect those who have faith and whose conduct is righteous. So when Allah says He'll destroy every town and every city, the implication from the rest of the Quran is that He will destroy every town and every city which deserves to be destroyed. And so now we have to use our mental faculty, our capacity to think. And there's so few in the world today now who can think. You have a smartphone, anybody? Yeah. This is the biggest destruction, the smartphone, of your capacity to think. So give it to your children and see what kind of, when they grow up, see what will be their capacity to think. Yeah, give it to your children. We have to look around us in the world today to see who are those who deserve to be destroyed. And then we know for certain these people, these towns, these cities are destined for destruction. We have first of all to locate in the Quran that deplorable sin called homosexuality, and the divine response to the people of Lut alayhi salam, the Prophet Lot. Alaysa minkum rajulun rashid? Is there not a single man amongst you who is Rashid, who is rightly guided? Are you all like this? And when he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he destroyed it in such a way that it would remain, I hate to use such a beautiful word here, unforgettable. That's how he destroyed them. And Sodom and Gomorrah sunk down to the lowest part of the earth as a sign for succeeding generations, that if you return to this sin, I will return to my punishment. Today we have one part of the world alone, only one, which is publicly flaunting its acceptance of homosexuality. Publicly flaunting it. Declaring that in our law, a man can marry another man and get a marriage certificate. That's a public declaration that we are ready to be destroyed. And that is in the modern Western world. Tomorrow you won't be able to get a loan from the International Monetary Fund unless and until you enact legislation to permit a man to marry another man. Yes. You won't be able to do trade unless and until you enact that legislation. You won't get a visa to travel to this part of the world unless and until you enact that legislation. The noose is tightening around the rest of mankind. This civilization is hell-bent on flaunting its homosexuality, its legalization of homosexuality, and imposing it on the rest of mankind. You don't need a PhD to realize that when the Great War comes, who are those who deserve to be punished, to be destroyed first of all? Answer: the modern West. Are Egyptian people ever ready to enact legislation to permit homosexuality? Is Algeria ever prepared to do that? Is Pakistan ever prepared to do that? Is Indonesia? No part of the world of Islam is like that. But the governments will be forced to do it. So the evil is coming from the Western world. And so our first conclusion concerning the great war that Allah has promised, which will destroy every town and city, we say first of all, it is that part of the world which is following faithfully in the footsteps of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's our first conclusion. If this is correct, what are the implications? I told you this lecture would better have been delivered before your main meal, because when you hear this lecture now, you'll be so terrified, so worried, you won't be able to digest your biryani. Answer: if you choose to live amongst them, you deserve the fate at which awaits them. You can't challenge me. You cannot challenge me on this statement. If you choose to live amongst them, you deserve the fate which awaits them. So you and your husband have the right, you have the right hijrah. She came to me yesterday to talk about hijrah. And hijrah means to flee from that part of the world which is destined for destruction, and flee to another part of the world which is not so evil. And there are some who will say, this is Surah Al-Imran now of the Quran, the angels are taking them to Jahannam. So the angels stop and they ask, Fima kuntum, what happened? How did you land in this mess, Jahannam? So they said, Kunna mustad'afina fil ard. We couldn't do anything else. We were helpless. You heard it before many times. You continue hearing it. But we couldn't do anything. We were helpless. So the angels said, Alam takun ardullahi wasi'ah fatuhajiru fiha. Was Allah's earth not wide that you could search somewhere in Allah's earth to make hijrah into the hellfire? So the excuse, we couldn't do anything else, is rejected. We now turn to the second category of people who deserve to be destroyed. This one was easy, homosexuality. When, excuse me, when the Quran was being revealed, this is the last revelation. It began with Adam alayhi salam. So many revelations, so many books came down, and now this is the last one, the Quran. And for 23 years the Quran is being revealed. And then the conquest of Mecca takes place. And then the Hajj takes place. The first, the last, the only Hajj our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam participated in. And he went on Arafat to give the last khutbah. It's called Khutbatul Wida, the farewell khutbah. And shortly after the last khutbah, revelation came down. This day have I perfected for you your deen. And this day have I completed my favor unto you, and have ordained for you as your way of life, the way of life of Islam. So when we heard this, we thought this is the end. No more revelation now. And maybe our Prophet will go soon. Imagine our surprise. He then left Mecca and he traveled back to Medina. And he has only 81 days left in his life. And when he arrives in Medina, Allah sends down one more revelation. What could it be? What subject is it? So important that this revelation comes down last of all, nothing more from the Lord God after this. And it comes down after he has said, I have perfected the deen, I've completed the job. What is it? It is a revelation in Surah Al-Baqarah in which Allah has declared war on riba. Not only he, but his messenger is also waging war on riba. Riba, of course, is a transaction in which you lend money, and you argue that lending money on interest is just another form of business. And Allah says, no, it's not business. Because in a business transaction, you can make a profit or you can suffer a loss. But when you lend money on interest, you immunize yourself from loss. It's a risk-free investment. Everybody else have to plant in order to reap. But you don't have to plant and you can reap the bank. So this is why Allah has prohibited riba, because it's not business. When an economy is based on riba, as the whole world today is engulfed in riba, what happens is that wealth no longer circulates through the economy. No. The rich remain forever rich, and the poor remain imprisoned in permanent poverty. In addition to that, there's another form of riba which causes the rich to keep on growing richer, and the poor descending into destitution and slavery. So Allah declared war on riba. And the Prophet ﷺ cursed all four. The one who gives riba, the one who takes riba, the one who records the transaction, and the two witnesses. And he said they're all equally guilty. So who are the money lenders of the world today? Yesterday, it used to be a fellow called Shylock. In India, was it the Bania they were called? Bania?
Yes.
Bania. These people, they don't know about India. Okay. The Bania, that somebody corrupted the Hindu faith, and a special branch of the Hindus emerged who were money lenders, and they would lend most of all to farmers. Yeah. Because of riba, we now live in a world in which around the world wealth no longer circulates through the economy. From the day Pakistan was born to this day, the economy of Pakistan has been the same. No one has changed it. The wealth of the country no longer circulates through the economy. It circulates only amongst the wealthy. Secondly, the rich are growing richer, and the poor are descending into permanent poverty, destitution, and slavery. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was the one leader of Pakistan who attempted to change the economy structurally, but he chose the wrong way. He chose socialism, which is a state intervention in the economy to redistribute wealth. A state intervention in the economy to redistribute wealth. That's socialism. And that is prohibited in Islam, but Bhutto didn't know it. At least he had this intention in his heart that I want to redistribute the wealth of the country. He's the only one in Pakistan who ever attempted a structural change in the economy, but he failed because what he was attempting was haram. So from the day Pakistan was born to this day, the economy remains the same. I gave 3 lectures perhaps, or 2 in Bradford on this subject, so I can't repeat it today, on how the monetary system is also impoverishing. So if Allah says He's going to wage war on the money lender, who is the money lender of the world today? When Pax Britannica came into being, London became the financial capital of the world. And everybody who wanted to borrow money had to come to London. And the Bank of England, of course, had unlimited money because it's no longer gold and silver. Now it's paper. And you could keep on printing paper as much as you want if you have power. And so London and Britain became the money lenders of the world, lending money on interest. And when Pax Americana replaced Pax Britannica, United States became the financial capital of the world. And the American banks, the commercial banks, became the money lenders of the world. And then the International Monetary Fund was created to become the lender to governments. And as a result of this second stage of the process of riba, the Western world became filthy rich, nauseatingly rich, drinking the blood of all of mankind and enjoying the taste of the blood. And the sheep and the cattle and the goats cannot understand that this wealth is filthy. And they flock here. This is where the good life is. And they stay away from those people who are now living in a desert of poverty and destitution. Who wants to live with, that's hell. This is heaven. So the first to be destroyed by Allah in the Great War are those who are oppressors, oppressing the rest of the world through riba, impoverishing the rest of the world, and sucking the wealth of the world and bringing it here. It's the Western world. So we have the second evidence now, that when the Great War takes place, modern Western civilization is the first to be destroyed. There is a third way of now analyzing the subject, and that is that Allah sent mankind on earth, and He sent to us guidance and prophets. And He says, whosoever follows my guidance, فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, you will have no cause for grief. You will have no cause for fear. But what about those who forget His guidance and His law? We don't care two peanuts for that anymore. For example, even a schoolboy knows that if you want to build a masjid, you have to first look for the land. And in Mecca, and these are people who are worshipping idols in Mecca, and if they wanted to do any construction work in the Kaaba, and they needed money, they will not accept money from a moneylender. And they're worshipping idols. And they insist we have to get clean money for the house of God. Good? Today we we live in a world in which the house of God is on sale. Really? Can you sell the house of God? Would anybody sell a masjid? Would anybody sell a masjid? Would Muslims ever tolerate that a masjid is sold? Never. You have people will riot, there will be death, there will be bloodshed, but they will not allow a masjid to be sold. Well, then Allah in the Quran says not only the masjid, but He speaks about the temple, and He speaks about the synagogue, and He speaks about the cathedral. The houses of worship of the Christians, for example. And He puts that alongside the masjid, and He says you must protect them all. So if this is a house of God, that also is a house of God. If the masjid is a house of God, then the church is also a house of God, according to the Quran. So they're selling the house of God now. Do you know how did they get the money to build this house of God? The Christian world has now forgotten about riba. We have to teach them about riba. Okay? And this is the capital of the world of oppression. This is where the blood money is coming. Sucked from Pakistan and India and Egypt and all these places. And they take that blood money to build up a church or a temple or a cathedral. And today they're selling it. We don't care two peanuts about where they got the money from to build the place. They're selling it, we're going to buy it. That is what you are today. We don't care two peanuts for it. So what does Allah do? When you don't care two peanuts anymore for the law, we will buy the temple, we will buy the cathedral and convert it to a masjid. We don't care how they got the money. In the Quran, when you abandoned the law and you went fishing on the day of the Sabbath, this was yesterday's lecture, Allah responded with terrible punishment. He said, Kunu kiradatan khasi'in, be apes despised. So the divine anger against the moneylender, the divine anger against homosexuality is the same divine anger against those who abandon the law. And that's Western Christianity today. The Western Christian world is not the same as Russia, not the same as the Orthodox Christian world. This side of the world have said, we don't care for the law anymore. And if we want to enact legislation, we'll do it for a man to marry another man and get a marriage certificate. So when Allah's destruction is to come in the Great War, who are those who are on the first named on the list? Answer: the modern West. This book was written to explain that subject. Now then, having gone to the Quran to explain the Great War, we now try to describe the war itself. I don't know whether, I can't remember yesterday whether I mentioned it, but our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, prophesied. He said that the river Euphrates will uncover a mountain of gold. Have you heard it? Huh? Kabineh?
Yes, we have, but not yesterday.
The river Euphrates will uncover a mountain of gold, and people will fight for that gold, and 99 out of every 100 who fight for that mountain of gold will be killed, and each will say, I will be the one who will survive. But the believers must not touch that gold. Those who hold the view that this is muhkama, yesterday I explained muhkama to you, it must be understood literally. They are waiting for a mountain of the metal to come out from underneath the river. And my response is, find a very comfortable sofa, because you have a long wait. This is not muhkama, this is mutashabiha. You have to interpret it. And it is Allah's kindness that He allowed me, after I completed my studies in Islamic studies and in philosophy in Karachi, that I then was blessed to go to 2 universities to study international relations. And that included studies in international monetary economics. I've lived a unique scholarly life. So when I saw that hadith, Allah blessed me to interpret it. That they gave us a monetary system in which they said, this is 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference in upstate New York, and then the emergence of the International Monetary Fund. That only the US dollar has a link with gold. No other money. So the US dollar is His Majesty, the US dollar, the ruling currency. And the link with gold is that the US government pledges to redeem to any central bank which comes with US dollars, to redeem US dollars for gold at $35 for 1 ounce of gold. Nobody ever bothered to do it because nobody saw the scam except General Charles de Gaulle. Our scholars of Islam were sleeping. They are still sleeping up to now. General Charles de Gaulle stood up. I explained this last night when you all came. He stood up in the French National Assembly in 1966 and he condemned the monetary system as biased in favor of the United States. So the Zionists got to work and they brought him down the way they brought down Imran Khan. But France as a state continued to oppose the monetary system. And France was taking US dollars to Washington and say, give us the gold at $35 an ounce. By September 1971, the United States was catching something called cold feet. I don't know what's the Urdu expression for that, to catch cold feet. So Richard Nixon said, we gave our word, but we don't have to keep our word. We are reneging on our obligation to convert US dollars for gold. We're not going to do it anymore. They should send them to jail. We can't send the United States to jail. So from 1971, the US dollar no longer has any link with gold and is a place called no man's land. It could collapse. They then planned the war of 1973, the Arab-Israeli war, knowing that King Faisal, rahimahullah, had threatened to impose an oil boycott on the United States. And they wanted it. And they were on both sides of the war because they had the Soviet Union with them. And as soon as the war started, Faisal imposed the oil boycott. And the price of oil escalated by 400%. From $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. And the Arabs were rich. Kissinger waited for a few months and then he flew to Riyadh and he pulled off the biggest trick in all of human history. Because Faisal didn't have more than peanuts in his head and he didn't know the Quran. Yeah. Up to now they don't know the Quran. Faisal agreed to a haram agreement. Faisal agreed to destroy the free and the fair market, whatever remained of it, and that no one can buy oil, Saudi oil, except with US dollars. And when he got the other oil producing countries to accept it, and OPEC also joined it, the petrodollar was born. Your paper money would rise if there is a demand for it. And if there is no demand, it will fall and fall and fall. So all that Kissinger had to do was to create a demand for the US dollar, and you'll survive. That's all. You don't need a PhD to understand it. Oil was the biggest commodity traded in the world market. And if you cannot buy the oil except with US dollars, you have a built-in mechanism now to ensure that the US dollar remains strong and fly higher than ever before. And that's how an ocean of oil underneath the river became a mountain of gold. But they will shut the doors of the masjid on Imran, Hosein. You're not allowed to explain any hadith like no one has ever done before. We will shut the doors of the masjid on you. We'll block you every way we can block you. That is that sinking world of Islamic scholarship out there. And I feel sorry for them. All I can say, may Allah forgive them. May Allah forgive them. You can't fight the truth. No, you can't fight the truth. So an ocean of oil underneath the river now became a mountain of gold. This is the ta'wil, or the interpretation. So we know that there is going to be a war for the mountain of gold when the petrodollar system is threatened. And when that war takes place, it would not be a war with conventional weapons, because it's 99 out of every 100 will be killed. So you don't need a PhD to realize that this is also the malhama. Oh, no scholar in history ever said this is the malhama. How could Imran say that? Don't worry, you eat your biryani and go home and sleep. History will leave you behind, and history will move on. That's their pathetic future that awaits them. History will leave them, and history will move on. They'll be left behind by history, and they don't understand it. Is the mountain of gold now at risk? Is the US dollar in more peril today than ever before? When they imposed sanctions on Russia, more sanctions than ever before, no one ever exposed those sanctions, and the Russian ruble was falling. What did Putin do? He did the same thing that Kissinger did. He said, you want my oil, you pay for it in rubles. And they want his oil, they can't do without his oil. He said, if you want my oil, you'll have to pay for it in rubles. They said, but the sanctions means we cannot pay in rubles, we have to pay in euros. So Putin said, no problem. You will pay in your euros, but that would not be the end of the transaction. You're not going to get your oil as yet. When we take the euros and we change it to rubles, only then will the transaction be finished. And then you'll get your oil. That's what's happening now. And the Russian ruble began to rise. Was it yesterday I mentioned China? No, last night I mentioned it. A few years ago, China offered Saudi Arabia that we will buy your oil, and China is the biggest customer of Saudi Arabia. China said, I'll buy your oil from you and I'll pay for it in Chinese yuan. And when I pay for it in Chinese yuan, I will then redeem the yuan for gold. So we will not be in violation of the IMF. The Saudis realized that if they did this, that's the end of Pax Americana. And so the Saudis hesitated until the elections in the United States. And in the elections, Biden blasted Mohammed bin Salman and said, this is the man responsible for the assassination of Adnan Khashoggi, who was working in the United States for an American newspaper. And Biden said this man is a pariah. So Mohammed bin Salman never forgave him. And now, because the Saudis have realized, they're studying eschatology now, the Saudis have realized that Pax Americana is on its way out. And it's Pax Judaica which will replace it. So the Saudis want to be on the correct train. So they're establishing closer ties with Israel, and they're backing out of the relations with America. So the Saudis have now said to China, let's talk. Let's talk. To establish a mechanism whereby China will pay for oil with yuan and then converted it or redeem it for gold. The writing is on the wall. The days of the petrodollar are now numbered. And they have to have the war for the mountain of gold. When that war does take place, it will give them a cover to cover the collapse of money. If they don't have the war and the US dollar collapses, there's going to be civil war in the United States, because everybody will see their wealth disappear overnight when the US dollar collapses. And every American has a gun. You can go and buy it. So there'll be anarchy in the United States and Canada when the petrodollar collapses. Not just in the United States and Canada, but all the rest of the world who are puppy dogs of Washington. They have to save themselves from that catastrophe of civil war in the United States if the US dollar collapses. There's only one route they can travel, only one, to save themselves, and that is to provoke the great war, nuclear war. And in nuclear war, the US dollar will collapse, but they will not be blamed for it. I've given you the substance of the lecture, but that's not all in the lecture, but I don't want to proceed further. I got this from a scientific journal, that such a nuclear war will produce 150 million tons of smoke. 2,600 US and Russian strategic nuclear weapons on high alert are launched in 2 to 3 minutes, and launched at targets in the United States, in Europe and Russia, and perhaps other targets as well, as in Turkey, for example, and Kosovo and so on. So 2,600 strategic nuclear weapons. Since this was written, probably more than that now. And in addition to that which is officially known, there's that which is secret, that we don't know about. Some fraction of the remaining 7,600 deployed and operational US and Russian strategic nuclear weapons are also launched and are detonated in retaliation for the initial attacks. Hundreds of large cities in the United States, Europe and Russia are engulfed in massive firestorms which burn urban areas in tens or hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. The whole of Britain, the whole of this island in flames, the whole country in flames. 150 million tons of smoke from nuclear fires rise above the cloud level and into the stratosphere, where it quickly spreads around the world and forms a dense stratospheric cloud layer. The smoke will remain there for many years and block sunshine. The smoke blocks up to 70% of the sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface in the northern hemisphere, and about 35% of the sunlight is blocked in the southern hemisphere. In the absence of warming sunlight, surface temperatures on the Earth become as cold or colder than they were 18,000 years ago at the height of the last ice age. There will be rapid cooling of more than 20 degrees centigrade over large areas of North America, and of more than 30 degrees centigrade over Eurasia, including the agricultural regions. 150 million tons of smoke in the stratosphere will cause minimum daily temperatures in the largest agricultural regions of the northern hemisphere to drop below freezing point for 1 to 3 years. The frost at night time would prevent food from ever being grown. Average global precipitation will be reduced by 40% during the prolonged cold. Growing seasons for food would be eliminated for many years. You can't grow any food. Massive destruction of the protective ozone layer would also occur, allowing intense levels of dangerous UV light to penetrate the atmosphere and reach the surface of the Earth. Massive amounts of radioactive fallout would be generated and would spread locally and globally. And the targeting of nuclear reactors would significantly increase the fallout of long-lived isotopes. Gigantic ground-hugging clouds of toxic smoke would be released from the fires. Enormous quantities of industrial chemicals would enter the environment. It would be impossible for many living things to survive the extreme rapidity and the degree of changes in temperature and precipitation combined with drastic increases in UV light, massive radioactive fallout, and massive releases of toxins and in this industrial chemicals. Already stressed land and marine ecosystems would collapse. Unable to grow food, most human beings would starve to death. A mass extinction event would occur similar to what happened 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs were wiped out following a large asteroid impact with the Earth. 70% of species became extinct, including the animals, which were all greater than 25 kilograms in weight. Even human beings living in shelters, equipped with many years' worth of food, water, energy, and medical supplies, would probably not survive in the hostile post-war environment. This is a scientific evaluation of what will happen in the Great War. But we say human life on earth will not become extinct. That there's part of the world which will survive. Because, for example, within 7 years of the Great War, a Muslim army will conquer Constantinople. So we don't share this pessimistic scientific view that all human life will become extinct. From then the Great War takes place, that's the end of history, everything finished. That's not true. A nuclear war has never taken place in history. This is the first time. So there are no experts. I suggest to you, this is a small book, the Quran, the Great War in the West. It wouldn't take you more than 2-3 hours to read this book. Do please get the book.